Mecha. What's not to love about giant robots armed to the teeth with enough firepower to rewrite the Geneva Convention? From real to super, eastern to western. If they're giant robots, there's a chance it'll be good. Usually. And with news that Gundam Breaker 4 is coming out this August, which hopefully won't be shitty like the last one. Here's a game that will hopefully tide some over until then. Megaton Musashi Wired. The third iteration of the Megaton Musashi game, a Japan-only title that finally made a worldwide release in April. A super robot action RPG with a batshit insane storyline, over-the-top action, and a lot more customization than I expected. Developed and published by Level 5, who are arguably known for their Professor Layton, Nazuma 11 and Yokai Watch series, in addition to a bunch of other great games. Alongside the game was an anime, which is just the game retold. You might be asking yourself, how come I've never heard of this game coming out until now? Well, that's because this game had pretty much no marketing. There was a trailer for it last year, which I seem to vaguely remember, but other than that, nothing you could find, unless you're actively looking. Although there was an esports comp, but even then I never heard of that one either. 2118, a race of alien invaders called Dractors attacked Earth in an attempt to colonize the planet, eliminating 99.9% of humanity in 48 hours and turning Earth into a literal donut. Since then, the remnants of humanity have been living in blissful ignorance, having been mass mind-wiped to forget anything about the invasion. But after 3 years, humanity has been preparing themselves and are ready to take the fight back to the alien oppressors with giant mechs called rogues. However, the rogues they have now are no more than mere fodder. But after finding some hot-blooded youths who have the energy and bloodlust for revenge, they are able to unleash their greatest weapon of all, the Megaton class rogue, Musashi. That is pretty much the basis of the story. The game's story is split up into 3 sections, or I guess more aptly, seasons. You have the first season, the original story, the second season, exit storyline, and finally some extra stuff added for Wired. The first season is kind of like Power Rangers. We have teens with attitude who go about their school lives secretly fighting against aliens and giant mechs. The second season changes the lane real quick though, becoming Mad Max Hokuto no Ken adventures in the desert. And for the newer stuff, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but I will just say it gets really insane. Like I said earlier, Level 5 also produced an anime alongside the game, and from what I've seen, it's pretty much the game in anime form. But there are a few extra scenes and moments that are expanded upon. There are anime cutscenes in this game, both 2D and 3D, but most of the story is told through voice dialogue boxes and character sprites, of which there are a lot of. A lot. If you're a fan of mecha, or anime in general, you will notice that there are a lot of influences in this game, from the storyline even to the characters. Speaking of the characters, the crew of pilots this game follows are pretty much insane in one way or another, but they do get some pretty decent screen time in development, for the most part. For some of the cars, they get more development with side stories, which provide more details about their quirks and personalities. Overall, I think the writers did a good job with the story. The comedic moments made me laugh for most of the time, while the emotional moments hit real hard, and they never fail to get me excited for the hype shit. Usually with these reviews, I'd like to make a comparison to other games, just so people get a better idea of what the game is like, in case my ramblings don't make much sense. For Megaton Musashi, I'd say it's a combination of Gundam Breaker, Grand Blue Relink, Phantasy Star Online, and Diablo. Outside of combat and missions, it's a side-scrolling visual novel. You control one of the pilots, usually Yamato, walking about town going from point A to point B to progress the story, or you can just press the map button and quick travel there. But if you decide to walk, and you should, along the way you can talk to people and pick up shiny things off the ground. These shiny things are usually money or materials, but can also be exchangeable items for different vendors or gaining access to side stories. The game is very cutscene heavy, and during main missions there will be a lot of moments where the combat will pause to show these cutscenes. It does get a little grating with how often it happens, but I suppose they figured that was the best way for them to tell the story. Since the last version of this game was a free-to-play title, while it retains all of those things, like the premium items for drops and revives and whatnot, but since this is a full release, they changed those microtransactions into fairly generous item drops. And there's also a premium pass, which drops those premium items. And honestly, not terrible in this game, since there isn't really anything you can miss out on. To start piloting the rogues, all you have to do is go to the mission counter or the app on the phone, and you'll be shown a selection of missions to choose from. When you choose your mission, you'll be allowed to change your loadouts before heading out. When you make your loadout, you can take up to 3 melee and ranged weapons, and when you gain more pilots and rogues, you can also have 2 other rogues with you. When selecting a mission, you will notice that some might have a yellow flashing icon. This means that certain rogue parts will be guaranteed drop, though some of the time it won't be the part you're hoping for. Once you finish renting your rogues, you'll drop onto the battlefield and begin combat. With almost all missions, you go from area to area, opening boxes and destroying the Dractas that stand in your way, before reaching the final area to kill the boss. Though some missions are just battle arenas or boss fights. Sometimes, if there are many enemies on the field, they can merge into a larger enemy, but are still relatively easy to kill. The combat starts out pretty simple. You have a melee and ranged attack, a jump, a dodge, a block, a heal, and a weapon wheel. Holding the weapon wheel button lets you select whatever weapons you have equipped and switch over to other rogues. However, when open, your rogue will stop moving, so you should make your selection quickly. With melee, you just smash the button to kill. But once you start unlocking more moves, the combat system broadens out quite a bit. With ranged attacks, the lock-on works pretty well, but you can also choose to aim and fire if you want to be more accurate, or land attacks against certain parts of bosses. Holding the right shoulder button, then pressing one of the face buttons allows your controlled rogue to perform a special move. Special moves use tachyon points, and super special moves, moves that use 4 or more tachyon points, will have their own cutted animations. Later on in the game, you will gain access to combination moves, where you and another rogue will link up and perform a powerful combo attack. If both rogues are close to each other, the stronger the attack will be. Pressing the start button allows you to enter cockpit view and activate your kabuki function, a devastating finishing move with its own gauge. And if other rogues have their functions ready, you can chain them together to gain buffs and debuff the enemy. However, just remember, once you use it, it will take a long while for the gauge to build up before you can use it again, so save them for the end. You can fill the tachyon points and the kabuki function gauge by attacking the enemy, but only with melee attacks. In cockpit view, you can repair damaged parts on rogues, though they can break down again and are more susceptible in breaking down the next time you take damage. Depending on the area where rogues are damaged, they'll experience the following debuffs. Head damage disables the minimap and targeting, body damage causes greater vulnerability, arm damage lowers attack, and leg damage reduces movement speed. Only one part can be repaired at a time. Luckily, to repair them, you only have to highlight and select them, then can exit the cockpit to resume battle. Or you could just let yourself get killed, which uses a repair kit to fix everything. You only have 5 repair kits with each mission, but you can get some more by opening green boxes during a mission. Pressing up on the D-pad allows your rogue to heal itself, which might not seem necessary at first, but later on, when the game picks up in difficulty or combat becomes more frantic, enemies will do quite a bit of damage, taking only a few shots to take you or your teammates out. Speaking of teammates, the ally AI in this game is pretty competent. A little too competent, in fact. They'll take out enemies and sometimes aggro them, so you'll get some breathing room, which is nice since they also have infinite revives. One thing I found out was that if you're running low on health and can't heal, you can switch over to another rogue just before the one you're controlling explodes. This means that you can save up on repair kits, but it's still a rather risky method, especially when there are a lot of enemies on the field. While all melee weapons have their own set animations, almost every gun works differently. Some can charge up, some can home in on enemies, hell, some can even do both at the same time. Some skill attacks will cause a yellow circle to appear on the ground, called a force field. Touch it and you'll gain a force level, of which you can get up to 3, which boosts your damage. When fighting bosses, they will sometimes drop orbs, and when you collect enough of them, you'll activate a Megaton Fury, which slows enemies down and allows you to attack uninterrupted for a short amount of time. Dractas have weaknesses to certain types of weapons and elements. There are 3 weapon types: Destroy, consisting of great swords and knuckles, Slash, sword and shield, dual swords and lances, and finally Shot, which are guns which consist of hand cannons, machine guns, shotguns, and bazookas. The 5 elements are flame, ice, lightning, beam, and power. The first 3 are pretty self-explanatory, but beam increases chance of critical hits, while power can cause enemy parts to break down more easily. Depending on the weapon type and its element, damage effectiveness towards enemies will differ. You can still cause a reasonable amount of damage with either weapon type or element, but it's more effective if you have both. Now, it wouldn't be a co-op game without a buffing mechanic, the Kakugo system, an AoE buff for rogues. Pressing left or right on the D-pad will change which buff you have, and pressing both shoulder buttons will activate it. The 3 buffs are Iron Wall, which lowers attack but increases defense and aggroes enemies, Sacrifice, which increases attack but lowers defense, and finally Survival, which lowers both attack and defense, aggroes enemies, but creates a healing field. When you defeat an enemy, they'll drop parts and materials. Once you finish a mission, you'll see all the drops you earned. And let me tell you, there's a lot. So after a couple of missions, it helps to go to the hangar to check if there are any better parts. And with all the old stuff you don't need, just dismantle them, but not the legendaries. They can be upgraded later on. With the parts you dismantle, you can recycle them for other parts, or you can just develop or buy your own. But I've found that it's better to use what you find. Once you equip your rogues with the best parts you have available, their combined stats will grant extra buffs. Also, collecting rogue parts and weapons will fill out your collection file, which also gives rogues extra boosts and better proficiency with the weapons that you use. Now here's the part of the game that's really in depth, the customization. These consist of rogue parts, mod chips, the motherboard, and pilot skills. With the rogue parts you can mix and match parts to make your own creations, or monstrosities if you're focusing purely on stats. There are two forms of rogues, heavy and smart. Heavy forms are your usual standard rogues, while smart rogues are more thin and sleek. Most rogues are heavy, while there are a few smart forms, but you will mainly get those by the end of the game. You can change the color of rogue parts and weapons, though you'll have to do it in another menu, which kind of annoys me because they could have done it within the hangar menu, but I guess it works either way. There is a transmog system called holocasing, where you can choose to change the look of your rogue while maintaining its stats. However, to do this, you'll have to use holo crystals, but luckily, since they removed the microtransactions in this game, you'll be drowning in this stuff. Mod chips are small extra buffs that can be installed onto rogue parts, with parts of greater rarities being able to equip more onto them. The motherboard is pretty much just building your own PC, where you install parts to improve performance and stats, and where you can also equip your skills. These are, I suppose, ways to classify each rogue to have their own specialties. Like, one might be focused on melee attacks, another focused on range, while another acts as a support or a tank. But honestly, it can be quite full on, especially for a guy like me who's lost a lot of brain power over the years. So if you're looking for tips on getting the best builds, then unfortunately you won't be finding anything like that here. But level 5 have taken that into consideration and allow people who want to mainly focus on the action to install presets, which automatically apply parts that focus on whatever aspects they want. Plus, these don't really matter too much early on. However, if you're playing on harder difficulties, or at the end game, you'll want to take these things into consideration. Once you lock the motherboard, you can choose to create multiples of parts and attacks. And again, there is a lot to unlock. Finally, there are also pilot skills, which are skills that certain pilots have, which can be equipped with pilot points. When unlocking these skills, they can be equipped to the pilots themselves and their fellow teammates. In addition to the gameplay stuff, there are also cosmetic customizations as well, such as having decals on your rogues, your own navigator, and also adding keychains to your cockpit. None of these I bothered with, except for the navigator, but even then I turned that off after a few missions. One thing I'd like to mention is that Megaton Musashi also has a few crossover mechs as well, which you will have seen scattered throughout this video. Mazinger, Getter 1, Combattler V, and Voltes 5, all of which have their own special attacks that can only be used if your rogue has all of their set parts equipped. Apparently in X there was also Grandizer, but that didn't make it to this version. It might come back in a later update, and hopefully level 5 might add some more collabs. Personally, I would hope that they get Big O or Gunbuster in, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Finally, there is online crossplay in fact, for co-op missions and the PvP Coliseum. For the latter, I did get a few matches in, and as expected, I got my ass handed to me. Well, I did win one match, but I was carried by others who knew what they were doing. With the Coliseum, there are parts specific to that mode, which I suppose is meant to even up the playing field. Still, it was pretty fun, and the connection was solid. I wasn't able to get into co-op missions, but if the PvP was any indicator, the connection should still be pretty solid. Although, since there aren't many people playing this, even with cross-platform online, it'll take a while before you can connect with others. Overall, the game is really enjoyable, and for the most part, mind-numbingly, satisfyingly fun. Some might find the visual novel storyline, or perhaps the overabundance of stat management off-putting, but the combat very much makes up for it. As you have seen throughout the video, the game is very much styled like a shonen anime. The 2D and 3D visuals look really nice, the mech designs are pretty cool, with most of them having a rather bulky look to them, though for some, designs could take a while for you to warm up to. Like, some of the rogues seem either way too bulky or lanky, but there are those that really fit the look. I'll use the crossover mechs as an example. Getter 1, Voltes 5 and Cop Battle V looked really nice in this game, but with Mazinger, I thought he looked a little too wide. I also like the contrast between the human rogues and the Dractors, where the former are large, bulky, with lots of color and detail, and also look very anime, sort of like plastic models, while the Dractors are sleek, Tron-like, very sci-fi, and are reminiscent to knights. Yeah, not much else for me to say here. Game looks good. There is only Japanese dubbing, and if you're familiar with the Japanese seiyuu industry, then you'll notice some familiar voices. The music is quite pleasant to listen to. I wasn't sure what to expect of it at first, but once I listened to it, I immediately took a liking to it. Plus, there are quite a few bangers in there. What I was surprised to hear was that when you have a full collab set equipped, during the send-off a Showa theme tune plays. I was trying to figure out whose theme was actually playing, but I think it might be a medley of all the collab mecha. Or it could be an original piece. If anyone knows, please tell me in the comments. Who am I kidding? You probably all backed out during the intro. So, for my final thoughts. As much as I enjoyed Megaton Musashi, due to a lack of marketing, it is quite unfortunate to say that this game is pretty much DOA, which it really doesn't deserve. It's a great action RPG with satisfying gameplay, though it is quite heavy on the storytelling. And as someone who likes stories in their games, the amount of times that the game will just stop to tell some exposition did get a little annoying. But the story is such a wild ride that it kind of makes up for it. There were moments where I saw things coming from a mile away, but there are also quite a few moments that took me by surprise, especially when they decided to just put in an episode of the anime. What continued my surprise was the amount of mechanics in this game. Seriously, every time you finish a main mission, it just keeps unlocking more and more features. Hell, even after finishing the story, apparently there is another difficulty level and equipment tier to unlock. So as you can see, the game is quite grind heavy, especially if you're hoping to unlock most things. Overall, I definitely recommend it. It might be a little pricey, with here in Australia at $76, but when you think about it, that's actually pretty reasonable, especially compared to current AAA releases that are considerably more expensive. Hello again everyone, thank you for watching this review. Quite late with this one again, but I wanted to make sure I got as much as I could out of the game before I fully made this video. I do have some other stuff planned, like the Summer Games Fest and the Steam Next Fest going on, which hopefully those won't be as late, but who knows at this point. Anyways, like, comment, subscribe, the usual, and I'll see you all soon.